to hear from the members which are willing to take the floor. I would suggest Mr. Engel goes first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for providing us with a second working document which, quite like the first, lists a number of areas deemed potentially problematic with respect to fundamental Hungarian legislation now in force. I do have a number of comments on the substance which could almost be considered replies, but I would also say, in order for this document to be objective in the full sense of the word, a potential problem should be gauged against potential comparisons, which is what I'm going to do on 4 different counts. The first is the element of rushing through the constitutional text without enough public consultation or whatever. There was a widespread public consultation in Hungary before this happened, and a massive number of popular contributions were received by the drafting organs before the final text was retained. So this is an element that would probably do good in the text. And even without this, one has to state, and this is how it is, the constitutional authority in any state, at the end of the day, is Parliament. There is no other constitutional authority. If a Parliament would be opposed to something, we would not have a constitution. So at the end of the day, the fact that Parliament voted the constitution has to be taken into account, as has the fact that before the constitution was adopted, there was a massive popular consultation on the new constitution. Second thing, the element of the cardinal laws. Yes, there might be a problem, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this also next week, with respect to what they all regulate. I do not see so much the problem of many references to law in a constitution. The problem might be that they have to be cardinal laws with a special majority, but if I look at my constitution, if I look at so many other constitutions, an enormous amount of matters are of course delegated to law, because the constitution is not an electoral program. The constitution is a fundamental charter, and it cannot regulate everything. The majority and the substance are of course areas on which we have to come back. And then a few things, Mr. Chairman, to dwell on with respect to what, for instance, the Constitutional Court is entitled to review. I remember in the days when I studied Belgian constitutional law, which was just after the federalization of the state in 93-94, the Belgian Cour d'Arbitrage, which was as good as the constitutional law, and I think it still is, was in charge of reviewing exactly 3 articles of the Constitution, exactly 3. One was equality of citizens before the law. One had to do with freedom of education, and the third one escapes my mind right now, but 3. And this is only one example of, I would say, probably many, to illustrate that the reviewing potentials and the area in which a constitutional court can review and how it can review is really a matter of substantial divergence between member states. And if the Hungarians have opted for this way of approaching the matter, I do not see anything contestable about that in principle. And then, Mr. Chairman, my final matter, which leads me to, at the very end, probably a very blunt suggestion. Budget and the absolute sovereignty of the Hungarian Parliament over the budget. We in this House have not so long ago decided that national sovereignty over budgets no longer exists. No national parliament, as soon as we get the fiscal compact and anything associated with it, will be fully sovereign over national budgets in the way it once was. There was a time in Germany when they operated in pre-fiscal compact terms, And when a reference to what the Germans call the Finanzverfassung, the so-called financial constitution, provided that, for instance, deficit in a budget must not exceed investment. It was possible in those days, I think it still exists, it's possible in those days, and I think it still exists, that there is a possibility to have the Constitutional Court of Germany review and potentially declare unlawful a budget which would not respect this provision. So, again, Hungary is not alone in establishing an authority which, on legitimate grounds, can establish how a budget has to look like. It has happened before, and above all, with everything that we are now inventing in terms of a totally misnamed, in my view, fiscal union and budgetary union, we are providing for the terminal loss of sovereignty of national parliaments over the national budgets. Now, if Hungary has maybe executed a preemptive strike in this respect, it could not even be blamed for it. But, Mr. President, I would suggest that at the very end of what we do here, we maybe consider an initiative report on the impact of national sovereignty over, and parliamentary sovereignty over budgets of what we are doing now in terms of European legislation. It is far worse than what has ever happened in Hungary. Thank you.